My name is Barbara Mitchell, and this is my positionality statement presentation. The intent of this presentation is to better understand the autobiographical elements and the role they may have in bringing bias or preconceived assumptions to my research. We'll begin by discussing my problem of practice. We'll then look at both self-reflexivity and professional experience to see if we can identify some of the potential problems that I might have for bias or preconceived assumptions within my research. We'll wrap up as I discuss my role as an action researcher. The recent Harvard Business School Review article discussed the dramatic changes that are happening in our learning and development areas. I want to focus specifically on leadership development. My problem of practice then is to discover whether the new leadership development approaches are providing technology-oriented organizations with the future leaders required to meet their desired objectives. I recognize that some of the elements of my background may have shaped the way that I think about my problem of practice. I identified four areas that I think may play a role. First, education was highly valued in my home. Both my parents earned graduate degrees, including doctorates, when I was a teenager, and I was often the one responsible for typing up their dissertations. My parents both worked, and they modeled servant leadership. They brought strong ethics to their position, even when it would hurt their professional opportunities or growth. My father and I are early adopters of technology. In fact, because I travel internationally, I can control much of my home by my phone. It allows me to use technology to turn on and off lights, to adjust temperatures, and even to provide access to my home. I also really love connecting with students and participants in the workshops. I believe that there are three potential areas I need to be thinking about for bias as I move into my action research based on this background. First, my own leadership views may reflect my parents' values and sacrifices. I might have a slight bias toward in-person programs because I like connecting with people, but I might also have a bias toward technology solutions. After I discuss my professional experience, I will then look at how I can challenge these biases and assumptions and what the class learnings taught me about bringing that challenge to them. Interpretive researchers aim to identify and articulate their prior assumptions throughout the process of inquiry. By making these biases transparent, it allows us to then identify ways that we can challenge them. First, as an international leader, I need to be aware that I might have biases about how I lead teams and what I think are the competencies that future leaders may have. As a master teacher, senior lecturer at Northeastern, and as a consultant, I may bring biases about how I like things to be done when you're creating learning and development for leaders. And then as a learning elite judge, I might be looking at best practices for organizations that are submitting their own leadership development programs. However, they may be early adopters, and that may not be an appropriate approach for all organizations. So we'll have to be conscious of the type of organizations that I'm looking at and aware of. And then finally, the faculty advisor for Harvard continues to reinforce the importance of a bias toward technology. From our class material, I think there were three readings that will help me challenge or manage bias. First, from Carlton Parsons in 2008, their work that talks about using approaches that consider the historical, contemporary, or cultural experiences. That will play a role in terms of how others might interpret leadership development. From Prisco, I think being open to the idea that others may experience the same event differently plays a similar role. I'll need to be careful about misinterpretation. And then finally, from Heron Anderson in 2015, I'll need to be aware that bias needs to be reviewed frequently throughout the study. I believe my role as an action researcher will be an outsider in collaboration with insiders. Heron Anderson provides some good recommendations to help me consider how to manage that role. First, the mode of participation. I need to be focusing on a co-learning and cooperation mode, which will help us develop a relationship with the subjects themselves. For cooperation, it is local people working together with an outsider to determine priorities, or my preferred role to be a co-learner, local people and outsiders sharing their knowledge to create a new understanding and work together to form action plans with an outsider facilitator. The reciprocity for the stakeholders needs to be a with, we're working together with each other, and the mindset from our four squares of knowledge needs to be a we know, they know. This slide summarizes the potential biases and assumptions that I see, as well as how I will use the course materials to challenge those biases and assumptions. Thank you for viewing my presentation.